Hello. Thank you for coming. We're excited to do this panel. So just by way of introduction, let's each spend like about a minute just explaining who we are, what our background is, what expertise that we add to the panel so that we sort of know where everyone's coming from and what sorts of different viewpoints that we're going to get. Because very often I see the people start at the top. Let's go the reverse and start at the bottom. Mari, go ahead.
Sure. My name is Maddie Murdock, and I am a freelance tabletop gaming writer. And so I've written for companies like Green Ronin Publishing, Chaosium, Fantasy Flight Games, working mainly on their role-playing game IPs.
That's awesome. Thank you. JD?
Yeah, I'm JD Raisor, and I have a lot of experience with writing. I've been approved for 34 grants. That's pretty good for a grant writer. I've written novels and games. A few other things in there as well. So have a lot of diversity.
Cool. Thank you. James?
So I'm an electrical engineer by trade, but I live and breathe role-playing games when I get a chance. So I play with my kids. I play with the local teenagers. I play with an adult group that I've had for going on 7 years now. And so that's a variety of ages that I play with. I was going to say something else, but I don't remember. Oh, and I write reports on all of those things on my blog at MindweaveRPG at wordpress.com.
Cool. And after getting the okay from the panelists, I'll also occasionally be answering questions as well as asking them, and that's because my background is different. It's in video games. I am the director and design lead at a small indie studio called Space Heater Games, and we 9 days ago just released our first game. It's an RPG, a time attack dungeon crawler with heavy story elements in between your time attack runs, and we're really excited about it. We just got approached 2 days ago by a company that was asking whether or not that they were interested, and we were interested in partnering with them for a Switch port. So that's exciting. And so
it was released 8 days ago, just yesterday. But today it's been 9 days.
It was released 9 days ago today. So
and 8 days ago yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're that's what I will be contributing, is just sort of a video games perspective to things. And one of the interesting things about this is that most panels are given seed questions. We were not given any seed questions, so we're just kind of flying blind. So I'd like to start with the beginning and sort of the concepting. What comes first, the target audience or the high concept? Do you come up with what concept that you want to do and then choose a target audience for it? Or do you say, I'm going to target this audience, what would fit well with that target audience?
I guess you could go both ways. I've been working on, there's a TV show called Odd Squad, where it's kids who solve mysteries and strange things using math. And I thought, so I can't even decide which direction I came from on that one. I've been wanting to do a game based on that, where the kids are for kids to learn math. Was the high concept the detective side, or was the high concept, or did I come from the side of the kids? I was going to say that was coming from the side that wanted to teach kids math, but it definitely started out of that show, and so I flustered.
I think specifically... Oh, go ahead, JD.
For me, I came up with the concept of the game that I wanted to create based on my genealogy. I'm a royal, and castles and caverns and places to hide and battles and strategies, that's right up my alley. I also have a bachelor's degree in history, so again, that's right up my alley. So I came up with my idea for the game, and then I had to tailor it to an age group second.
That makes sense. Anyone else?
Worked in the tabletop gaming industry. Just with the companies that I've worked for, it seems like what they're aiming for is actually a target demographic because of the types of products that they create. And so they already have a following that generally lies in the age range of 13 plus. And so a lot of the types of products that they're creating already kind of have to be marketed to their kind of target demographic already. And so no matter the concept, they're still trying to aim for this particular target. I think that is largely what they kind of use as their guideline for whether or not they accept submission ideas or new ideas for IPs, because they're kind of trying to decide, well, this fit for my kind of general target demographic, or is this something that's a little more maybe mature or a little younger, and it wouldn't quite be a good fit for us. And if that's the case, then they probably will reject the submission or the pitch, and that might end up in the hands of maybe like an indie company or something like that who isn't necessarily concerned with like that specific target, or maybe they have a different target. And so I think as a freelancer, I've just kind of noticed that it really does depend on the game company, because they already have very clear ideas of who they're trying to market their products for.
And that's one thing that I've noticed, is that I feel as though the larger the company and the more longevity the company has, like the longer it's been in business, the more narrowly defined they have their target audience and and therefore their age demographic. And so the more you come from we want to hit this target audience instead of well, we've got this cool idea, who do we pitch it to? And that the smaller the company, the more likely you are to be based on the idea, what audience you hit, instead of the other way around. So it's cool to have that perspective.
And it feels like there could be some danger starting from that high concept, because you don't want to winnow it down to a specific audience. You're like, no, this concept is great and it should go to everybody.
That's one thing that I was actually wondering, is that I was talking with a marketing expert the other day, and the marketing expert was telling me, I can't believe how many people I need to tell, no, your target audience isn't everybody. Apparently there are a lot of writers that he goes up to and he asks, okay, so who is interested in your book? And the writer says, this is a book for everybody. How do you determine your age group? My apologies to Mari for this, because I know you work the other direction, but if you have an idea and you think it's the best thing since sliced bread, how do you narrow it down and say, this is the age group and or interest group and or demographic group that will be interested in it?
I think for me, if I guess this is kind of conceptually, and this is also coming from my experience having turned in a product that didn't quite fit what the company was going for. Specifically, they give the advice, think about tone, okay? Because the tone of the game is largely going to determine who's going to enjoy the game. So obviously something that has maybe like a high violence, high excitement tone, right, is probably not going to be something that parents will allow their children to play, or children might not enjoy playing that. And so I think tone is a great place to start in answering some of those questions. So is this going to be a game that largely focuses on, complicated emotions and a lot of blood, guts, and gore and sexual content? Or is this going to be just kind of like happy-go-lucky? Or is this more of an educational tone, right? I think that tone really does set the stage for all of those decisions.
I agree. With different games, exactly how we proceeded is based on tone. Tone determines the audience. So that's great.
Any other thoughts?
And I think there's often a temptation, even if you're not saying it's for everybody, to say, well, I want to make it for the largest audience possible, so it can be as big as it can be. And knowing your tone helps you know, now this may not be for everybody, right? That's something that's been hard for me to realize is, I really like puzzles and gritty kind of RPGs, and that's not for the broadest audience in the RPG community. It's more of a narrow audience than I wanted to accept.
And that's one thing that I've noticed, is that if you try to cast a wide net, that might work for big companies who have a lot of marketing push and stuff behind it. But if you're a small company, if you can be the best product in the world for a small group of people, then I think that you're more likely to find success than if you try to be an okay or mediocre product for a large group of people, because then you're just going to get outclassed by the people who are able to do large audiences better than you are. I think that the smaller you are, the more focused your audience needs to be in order to be able to compete.
That's a good point. There's a lot of big fish in the big ponds.
Right, but if you can be the biggest fish in the small pond, then. So here's a question. Are there times where you would want to try to make your tone accessible to a wider group of age ranges? For instance, I'm thinking of, I'm video games based, of course, but so I'm thinking of things like Mario Kart or Super Smash Brothers, where the tone is often lighthearted and whimsical, but in so doing, you're able to allow older audiences to play with their younger audiences. Is there a difference between the target demographic and the range of demographics that will find your game accessible? Because our age group can find Mario Kart accessible. There's nothing about the cutesy tone that turns us off from it. But I feel as though Mario Kart isn't necessarily geared towards 30 or 40-year-old gamers.
Yeah, maybe there's a depth question there. Well, even Mario Kart you don't love because of the depth. Super Smash Bros. More so. Anyone else have a thought on that?
Yeah, I do. What I did with my game is I went for a family-oriented, family sitting around. So we are going to have the multiple age groups right there together. What that looks like. What we have is the parents would be what we call a game master, and they would help their kids roll up their character. We have a really simple character roll-up. It only takes 10 minutes. Have it that way because we know that we're going to be dealing with some of the younger folks, and their attention span is shorter. And so we're going to, go with that. What we've been able to do is have mom and dad play the game with them and read to them the things that need read, and draw out a map as they go so they can see it visually and that sort of thing. And it works. It's worked now for decades. And so we're pretty happy with that. But you're right, there is some strategy behind it. And we had questions and we answered them and went that direction.
That's really cool. So the way that you're able to hit the multiple age groups so that parents can play with children is by having differentiated roles for the parents and the children so that both of them could find something interesting to them.
Correct.
That's cool. Any other thoughts on this?
I'm impressed with how well 5th edition does. Because even really young kids can handle 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and yet it can go all the way up to whatever kind of game you want, right? And I'm trying to think what it is about it that makes it appealing across the spectrum like that.
I think that's something that is kind of a little bit unique to tabletop role-playing games in that, like, most of the rules for most tabletop role-playing games is that the GM is in charge, and they can choose which rules to use and which rules to discard. And so if someone has a question, it's usually the GM gets to decide on the rule, whatever the rule is. And so I think that's interesting that you can have a game almost like community just generally accept that the rules are optional for this game, right? So you can definitely make it easy for children by maybe dumbing down the rules a little bit or only using a basic rule set of the engine. But definitely if you get like a min-maxing group that wants to have a really crunchy experience, with lots of little things to take care of and keep track of, then that's absolutely available as well inside of the gaming manual. So I think that's more of just a kind of almost unconscious genre rule of the gaming community rather than an actual kind of decision that maybe the game designers invented, I think.
Well,
I think there's a little bit of design that had to go into that because there are games that are designed specifically for kids that don't offer enough for an adult to enjoy it, like Hero Kids. And there's probably games that are too hard to dumb down for kids to be able to play, but
GURPS.
Yeah. Or my system is GURPS of 3d6 basically.
So one of the things that I found interesting is that you mentioned that 5th edition was something that could work well with children. But if you look at 5th edition after having been exposed to many of the earlier editions, you can see a heavy 1st and 2nd edition influence on 5th edition in terms of the way that magic items are valued and the way that loot is distributed. It feels as though the target audience for 5th edition is all of the nostalgic older gamers that were completely passed over by 4th edition when they changed so much so radically. So I think that it's interesting that you're saying that 5th edition is one of the most appropriate editions for children when it seems to be targeting one of the oldest demographics in the role-playing community.
Oh, I would have said that they did 4th edition and it brought in a completely different audience. I would say that 5th edition was a compromise to broaden that audience, and it really worked, right? It's growing rapidly. I've recently returned to 1st edition to the roots, and I'm loving 1st edition now. I've been blogging a lot about how 1st edition is better than all the rest, and at the risk of starting an edition war that was fought long ago. So it still has a lot about it that has made it easier to give to a younger audience than 1st edition feels like to me.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So what are some indications that you are hitting the wrong target audience by accident? How soon can you tell that you're hitting the wrong target audience? And at that point, what do you do? Do you switch target audiences or do you fix it?
It seems like you're talking about maybe like the playtesting stage of game development where
or earlier if you can.
Potentially where you're trying to figure out, I think, whether or not your game is working as far as the systems that you had in mind go, or whether or not the people that you intended to play the game are actually having fun, or whether or not the people need to change the way that your game works in order for them to have fun. And so I do think that extensive playtesting is important to kind of find out whether or not players can do that. Because I especially think this is true for young playtesters and experienced playtesters alike, which is that if they can break the game, they will, if they know that they're playtesting it. And so I really think that it's important to do that, to make sure that, you know, people of all backgrounds can play this game, or not all backgrounds, but all your intended background, right? And intended demographic can play it and figure out how to break the game.
As an engineer, we use Scrum to plan our projects, right? And it's kind of a fail faster mentality. And so as far as your idea of can you catch that earlier, I wonder if you could start playtest as early as possible with your target demographic rather than testing it with your developers, if that helps you get there faster. Even if it's completely unfinished, can you find playtesters to put it in front of? I think that's probably a valuable thing to do.
JD, any thoughts?
Yeah. With our game, our testers were mostly boys. And so we were gearing for the family, but we're also gearing for that teenage market as well. And they would do the testing, and they would help us with pictures. For example, here's a picture that I had one of the boys draw, and we have a lot of them. So we have a lot of boys that age that are really connected to our game. Here's one that follows. This is another map book or adventure, as we call them. And so we've had a lot of input that way. And what's interesting is we never really had a problem. We always guessed it right. And things always came out, yep, that's the way we want to go. And we really didn't have a problem with, nope. And
it's
so,
really fortunate.
I was going to say, it's very fortunate. That's exactly what I was going to say. And to have those young men jump in And then to be able to have them play with other people who are younger, well, that just improved our sales. And so it just really kind of went the right direction.
I think that's interesting, JD, that you specifically said, like, you got it right. And I think that comes from, right, just like your ability to understand your audience, right? So in order to make those smart choices, because knowing children, knowing Boy Scouts, and knowing what young boys would like is super helpful, because you're able to make a product that you know they will like already. And so maybe like you said, like the play testing isn't as important because you already know that they're going to enjoy it. And when you do show it to them, they do.
Okay. Let me give you two spin-offs that came from this game. I was a Boy Scout volunteer, asked to do certain things, including help run a summer camp. For a while, I was actually an employee of the Boy Scouts. And so I have a lot of Boy Scout interest. I was a Boy Scout, became a Eagle Scout, and so it was easy for me to go that direction. And so the two spin-offs are two merit badges that were created. And one is the chess merit badge. And I suggested that to the Boy Scouts. I wrote the first list of requirements, and I wrote the first draft of the pamphlet. The second one that spun off from this was game design, where I suggested the merit badge, and I wrote the list of requirements, the first list, but I did not do the pamphlet because I knew things were changing fast. And it was not a good idea to go into depth when computer games were going to just come right in and take over, and I couldn't perceive every direction that was going to go, and so I did not write. But anyway, just to let you know, I've had a major influence that way, and lots of people have earned those merit badges, and I'm just glad to be. It's kind of like the earlier decisions, and things just seem to go right. Well, that's exactly what happened when we took our next step. So,
and I've had a lot of fun teaching the game design merit badge.
I'm a game design merit badge counselor as well, but no one's approached me. So. Lost opportunity. So here's a question. We've talked a lot about playtesting. How does playtesting differ between age groups? Do you need to approach playtesting differently between younger and older target audiences?
Yes.
Yeah. The idea of trying to find young playtesters scares me. I'm curious what people have to say.
Well, when we went mostly with the boy group, my sons just picked up on it. And so I had my boys as early as age 2 in diapers playing the game. So you've got to make some revisions. You got to kind of catch on to somebody that young. And so it's a great question. And we did have to, look at that and make sure that it was okay that mom and dad could handle that for that young of and we did fine with that too. So.
If we were to move on from playtesting, we could talk about other considerations in designing for certain audiences. Are there any things that you would want to avoid if you're trying to hit older target audiences? Like, most of the time, from what I understand, you could have certain themes or mechanics that would be as appealing to older audiences as younger audiences. And I think that the plethora of My Little Pony tabletop RPGs that have popped up on the internet have shown that, sometimes theme does not know demographic. But if that's the case, then what does alienate older demographics? If you're trying to build something either for parents to enjoy with children or for older people specifically, what would you want to avoid in order to make sure that you hit that?
Well, just to kind of talk about the opposite of that, I mean, something that really works with like an older generation is nostalgia. And I think My Little Pony did that because it was a property in the 80s and then it was reinvented. And so I think that even though it was reinvented, it was something that still had a nostalgic factor. And I don't know that that necessarily influenced older generations of people to be interested in My Little Pony, but it initially did start as a property in the 80s. And so
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I watched
Most
a lot
of the
of My Little
people I
Pony when I was
know,
little.
most of the people that I know who are into My Little Pony would never have watched it back then.
Really?
Yeah, no,
It was quite different back in the 80s for sure. It was definitely marketed more toward young girls, obviously. Girls who liked horses and colors and that type of thing. And so I think they definitely changed the property quite a bit. But I do think, just kind of coming back to that idea, that I think our older demographics do like the idea of nostalgia quite a bit. So anything that can be reinvented for a modern audience or reimagined might work. I don't know if there's an opposite of that would maybe turn them off, but I think just to answer your questions backwards, that's what I would add.
Yeah. Okay. What alienates older audiences? What could make them consider it to be a kiddie game, something they would not want to play because it's too young?
Not exactly an answer to that question, but the type of thing that I've noticed that alienates my dad from playing. We used to play games with my dad all the time, and what started alienating him was games where we would outstrip him in skill and he wouldn't be able to play anymore. So competitively. So at one point he bought an N64 game that we weren't allowed to play unless he was with us so that he would be able to keep up. And even that didn't pay off, right? Because we learned faster. But it lasted longer that way. And so now as I've got my own kids and they want to play games with grandma and grandpa don't want to try to learn how to set up Among Us to play with they want to play with the grandkids, but as soon as it comes to trying to this learning curve, it's hard for them to put in the effort that they'd like to put in to be able to play with the kids, even though they're motivated.
I'm very interested in what will happen when our generation ages into retirement, because right now we're at the stage of life where we're super interested in video games but don't have as much time to play as we would like to. And I think that there's going to be some really interesting shifts in the games industry once the generation that grew up on the, Genesis and Nintendo 64 starts to age into retirement. That's going to open up some interesting market segments, I think. One of the things that I was thinking about when I was saying what makes something too young is how much emergent complexity it has. I feel as though if a game is able to support an older audience, it needs to have enough interactive systems and components in order to make it so that there is enough emergent strategy and emergent complexity that it can engage somebody at a higher educational or intellectual level, so that it remains interesting even when even if the theme doesn't necessarily match. And I know that, just to go back to the My Little Pony example, there is a lot of actually surprisingly deep stuff. There was this one episode in which there was a pony named Cadence and a doppelganger that was pretending to be Cadence. And they had like a singing competition, and in music there is a concept called cadence, and all of the real Cadence's lines were delivered in an authentic cadence, and all of the fake Cadence's lines were delivered in a deceptive cadence. And so just the fact that they would spend that much additional attention to detail makes it so that adults who are watching can say, oh, hey, I get that. That's really clever. That's really cool. And it engages people on a level beyond the child's level, which I think makes it accessible to more audiences. Does anybody else?
Yeah, I think My Little Pony and Adventure Time both do that really well with
Adventure Time, another great example.
Like teaching principles, where you're watching and you go, this is a kid's show, but they just said something really profound about the nature of death, right? And the nature of duty and responsibility. and you get a warm tingle watching, a kid's show, and you go, okay, I'm engaged now.
Mhm.
I think one of the things that would have a big influence, another component you'd be looking at, is the artwork. Is the artwork based on cartoon design, or is it based on more of a grown-up design?
I feel as though My Little Pony wouldn't have gotten the older following that it did if it still followed the Lisa Frank formula instead of modernizing themselves somewhat.
Mhm.
So, other considerations for ensuring that your game is hitting the proper age group. Does anybody else have any industry experience sort of looking into this? Any stories that you could tell about times where it really worked or times that it really didn't?
When I designed my RPG, this is an industry experience. This is, me by myself making dumb decisions experience.
Mhm. We were all there.
Yeah. I thought I want to design a game for an RPG, tabletop RPG, that appeals to engineers. So I'm going to put all these engineering style problems into this game where you have to design your spells using optimization equations and things. And wow, was that a bad idea, right? That's a small audience. But what I found, because I run that same system with the teenagers now, is that they actually, if I'd gone a little different direction with it, maybe it could have been successful. If I'd provided spreadsheets and things, like the tools that real engineers have to solve these optimization problems in work, to teach them to learn those types of tools through this magic system. And now that we have those types of things, they're learning how to use spreadsheets. I designed it thinking, oh yeah, this is going to teach people how to do multiplication and division in their head and do logarithms. And I should have been thinking is this will teach people to use spreadsheets.
For me, my big wake-up experience is before working on Final Winter at Space Year Games, my previous biggest project was a Minecraft mod pack called Blightfall. And I used to play a lot of Minecraft, a very high-level, complicated, modded Minecraft that felt more like Factorio than Minecraft or something like that. So I had misidentified the target demographic for Minecraft as being a lot older than it actually was because I was playing with all of my college friends and my wife and stuff like that. And so because of that, when I created this Minecraft mod pack called Blightfall, it was a very quest-driven, goal-driven mod pack, and I just had a lot of quest text, and I had a lot of, I guess you could call them engineering problems, like how do you automate the production of such and such so that you have a near infinite supply of it and things like that. And when it was finally released, Blightfall, I mean, it was still pretty successful, but it wasn't as successful as it could have been because apparently 12-year-olds play Minecraft too, and 12-year-olds don't like to read a whole lot. And most of the information about, like, here are some tutorials to get you started with the various mods that we'll be working with, and here's how some of the unique systems work. They were all present in the quest book because that was the best tool that I had for delivering that information. And people just weren't reading the quest book, and people would get confused when they would starve to death because they weren't using the food mods appropriately, and they weren't able to craft pickaxes because there was a mod that changed the way in which pickaxes were crafted. And a lot of people, especially the younger audience, just bounced off of it because there was too much complexity. And like, it found a niche audience in the older Minecraft gamers, but it was one of Technic's least successful mod packs just because of the target audience mismatch.
I wonder almost if that's why certain games like have a quick play kind of rule set of version of their mechanics for their games, because they're trying to see if people can pick up the game quickly and like the game enough to maybe immerse themselves later in like the full depth of the rules. Because obviously quick play versions of rules are designed to just let you start playing almost immediately, which is a little difficult to do with some game systems for sure. So I wonder if people, if that's kind of just a strategy more targeted toward allowing people to just like hurry up and play, rather than kind of getting bogged down in some other, I guess the details of learning everything that there is to know before starting to play.
Yeah. I remember when I was in middle school and I was looking at Pokemon cards, I bought a deck, and inside was a little survey that Wizards of the Coast was asking me to mail back to them. And it had questions on it that just sort of blew my mind, like, do you play with the cards or you just collect them? And I'm like, if I'm buying a card game, I'm going to play with cards, right? And then another question was, when you play the card game, do you follow the rules or do you make up your own rules? And it's like, why would I play using it? But apparently there was...
No, I was making up the rules.
You were making up the rules when you played?
Yeah, I was on the other side, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't have time to read no rules.
And I was the one to just collect the cards. I never actually played the game.
So I think that it's kind of interesting that Wizards of the Coast was identifying that there were people in their demographic who was rapidly buying and collecting Pokemon cards who played using a different rule set because whatever, and I just found that absolutely fascinating. And when you were talking about quick start rules, I think, what level of introductory emotional investment is your target audience willing to handle? Any other thoughts, or shall we move on to questions?
I have a thought.
Go for it.
That was a lot of tabletop games, of course, you need a set of dice. But which set of dice, and where are we going with that? So I have a little dice box here, and this is a nice wooden one, and I made it. But are we going to go with the fancier dice, or are we going to go with some plain six-sided dice? For my game, we went with the six-sided dice because we knew we were going to be dealing with kids, and it's a whole lot easier for them to 6 than 1 through 30 or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so that's
everybody has them.
Say that again.
And everybody has them.
Yeah, and everybody already had them. So that's easier. But that was one of the considerations that we had to think about is the rolling the dice system. So we came up with, you roll one dice to see if you hit your opponent, you roll another dice to see how much it hurt. And that was it. Now, more complicated, fancy, maybe you're shooting what we say is a mangonel or mangonel, other places pronounce it, and maybe you're shooting 5 arrows at somebody, so you've got that sort of thing. So there is some kind of a dice system or computer-generated system to see if you're hitting somebody, depending on what game you're in, and you have a strategy that you need to take into account. So I thought I'd mention that.
Yeah,
I think math is a really interesting component when it does come to games. Like how quickly can you do math on command in your head in front of all these people who are waiting for your turn to be over? I was playing a card game with I have a ton of cousins, and one of them was quite young, and he didn't know really how to do mental math very easily. And so we all wanted to play, and he wanted to play with us. And so he would just lie and just make up numbers to keep playing. And we just let him do it because we're like, well, this is supposed to be a game that we can all play together. But obviously, like, the math was just like far beyond his ability to do it. But he obviously wasn't following the rules, but it was something that we still had fun doing.
That's cool.
Back to the... I had a scout who was having a real tough time with math. And he played our game, and his math skills took off. It was great. Who he is because his dad... and I don't want to embarrass anybody, but he really was able to overcome his problem with math and determining things off of dice and then building up from there. And so
my father... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it does have a positive working with numbers.
My father rented an office outside our home, even though he was self-employed, just so that he could get out of the house. And I often used to have D&D sessions, in my father's office, and across the way in the office across from his was a economic forecaster, and the economic forecaster would often see us playing D&D, and he mistook it for studying. He said, "Wow, those children are so studious. Every time I pass by, they've all got their books out and they're arguing about mathematics and they're trying to solve problems." And it got me
almost as effective, though.
Yeah, it got me an internship with the company later because he thought I was some sort of super studious person. But yeah, it's an easy mistake to make just because of the complexity in that. So at this point, we've got maybe about 5 minutes for questions, maybe enough for one or two. Could the volunteer read us some questions?
Yeah, I got one right here. You guys talked about how theme and tone can affect the audience of the game, but can how that theme and tone is portrayed and shown affect the audience as well?
I think as far as theme goes, JD brought up a really interesting point, which is art. Because you can have a game theme surrounding something horrible, but if it has cute art, then children might like it. And I think of an example like something like Exploding Kittens, right? Like you could have an Exploding Kittens game that is a horrific game, but if you have just cute kittens on your cards and no blood, no guts, no actual explosions, right? Then it can be marketed for children. So I think that art is a really powerful way of maybe introducing a theme in a different tone. So I think that those can be played around with quite a bit.
So
Kittens is a great example.
I'm just thinking of Pokemon too as an example. I mean, like you have a society in which you enslave animals and force them to fight each other. Like taken a different way, that would be super dark, you know? So I have captured you in a Pokeball. Now I am mind controlling you into fighting against your former family. Like, but instead, like it's totally a kids show, and they take the theme of capturing animals and fighting with them in just a completely different direction, and they communicate that theme in a very different way. And you can go the other direction. I'm thinking of Madoka Magica. It's an anime which looks like a typical Sailor Moon like magical girl anime, except then you go like way into the dark end and find all of the emotional problems that come from having to be a magical girl, and it just gets super, super dark. And you can take a theme that used to be really childish and light and fluffy and make it super dark super fast. Everybody go ahead and give yourself a brief outroduction, and bye. I guess that each of us have 2 minutes left for our outroduction. Go ahead. Take it away. James.
Yeah. So you can find me at Mindweave RPG. I've got a few modules on Drive-Thru RPG. I've got a blog at WordPress, and that's what I do. It's mostly play reports on the blog, and lately some more philosophical things about First Edition as I'm becoming part of the old school revolution, old school renaissance, whatever you want to call it.
Can you link that in the chat?
Yeah, I can do that.
Cool. Mari.
Well, you can find a lot of my stuff available on my website, which is marimurdock.com. You can read all of my fiction that I've written for Fantasy Flight Games on their website, and that's all available for free. I also have a rule supplement book for the Expanse role-playing game that is on pre-order right now. So if you go to Green Ronin Publishing and just search for Ships of the Expanse, you can pre-order that supplement game book. And I think also I have a Twitch stream that I regularly host weekly with a bunch of local writers, fantasy and sci-fi writers. We play 5th edition Tuesday nights at 7 Mountain Standard Time, and that's always fun.
What's that stream called?
That stream is called Typecast RPG.
And for the record, the chat has asked us all to link our websites in here if you want to drop a link to that.
So for me, I go by Talonos online. Final Winter was just released like 9 days ago. We're super excited about it. I'll link to that in the chat as well. And beyond that, the next place that I'm going to be is on the Writing Magic Systems panel as a moderator, which kind of surprised me, but all I need to do is ask questions, so we'll see that. And then after that, the next one that I'm actually a panelist on is on the What Platform Should I Build My Game For? PC, console, VR, etc. And that'll be exciting. And I will link Final Winter in the chat. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the extra 3 minutes, and we'll talk to you later.
Now, Final Winter,
yes.
I had to resist installing and playing it last night because it looks like you can play it in just a 10-minute sitting. You can make an attempt. Am I understanding this game right? Wow.
There are 2 segments to it. You've got the dungeon crawling, where you have a 10-minute timed limit dungeon crawling. And then after that, you're in the town. You can see what effects the loss of your most recent character has had on the town. Kind of atmospheric, depressing. And then you hit run again, and then it picks a townsperson, and then that guy is thrown into the dungeon. And if you don't make it on that run, then you lose him too. And then the town doesn't have a blacksmith anymore. It doesn't have a miller anymore.
Yeah. 10-minute runs is definitely appealing for my schedule. And 2 gigabyte download size is definitely appealing to my hard drive.
That's so much bigger than it needs to be. Unity is great, but sometimes it really balloons its file size. Like we don't have 2 gigabytes worth of assets. A lot of that's just framework.
Oh, I'm just happy it's not, 40 gigabytes and I have to go and install something.
Yeah.